Hello everyone, welcome to Diplomatic Briefing. The first ASEAN-China Gulf Cooperation Council summit kicked off in the afternoon on the 27th. When Premier Li Chang delivered his speech, he said that China is willing to work together with ASEAN and the Gulf Cooperation Council, also known as the GCC, to fully leverage the synergy where 1 + 1 + 1 is greater than 3. He called on both sides to build a shared common market, making trade and investment even more convenient, to create a new model for international industrial and economic cooperation, and to explore new paths for mutual progress and inclusiveness among different civilizations. The total population and economic output of China, ASEAN, and the Gulf Cooperation Council countries account for about a quarter of the world's total. By fully connecting the markets of these three parties, Li Chang believes that this will definitely create even greater development opportunities and more significant scale effects. China looks forward to working with all parties to complete the negotiations on the free trade agreement with the Gulf Cooperation Council as soon as possible, in order to promote the growth of trilateral trade. The international media are also paying close attention to the trilateral meeting. They believe that, with US President Trump issuing tariff threats, ASEAN is moving closer to China and the Gulf countries. The first trilateral summit may even launch a special working group on trade and investment. Nikkei Asia reported that at the milestone trilateral summit held on May 27, Southeast Asia will seek to strengthen its trade relations with both China and the Gulf countries. The aim is to strengthen economic cooperation in response to the tariffs imposed by Trump. According to Nikkei Asia, based on the draft statement, ASEAN, China, and the Gulf Cooperation Council may agree to set up a joint working group to promote closer economic cooperation. The draft statement calls on all parties to enhance trade and investment, with priority given to large-scale infrastructure projects closely related to China's Belt and Road Initiative. This includes the development of logistics and supply chains. Both sides will also first carry out joint research projects and cooperation in the fields of low-carbon nuclear reactor technology and renewable energy. Analysts have pointed out that American protectionism is reshaping global trade relations, accelerating China's shift towards Southeast Asia, and prompting ASEAN to double its efforts in seeking other partners. Because a former Malaysian diplomat believes that this summit reflects a broader adjustment in the global landscape, showing that the US's dominance in capital flows and institutional influence is gradually weakening. Meanwhile, China's trade influence continues to expand, and it also shows that the GCC and Asia are building lasting economic ties. As for ASEAN, which has long had contact with both China and the US, how do AP and AFP report on this? Traditional Western media coverage tends to be biased. AP quoted an analyst saying that ASEAN is seen as clearly leaning towards China, while AFP cited experts' views that, given the uncertainty and unpredictability of economic relations with the US, ASEAN countries are seeking diversification. And from another perspective, this is already reflected in the viewpoint reports of Indian media like the Economic Times. Basically, it's saying goodbye Washington, hello Beijing, ASEAN is turning towards China and uniting to counter US tariffs. The report believes that, faced with threats and uncertainties coming from the US, ASEAN is shifting its strategy. They are moving from passive diplomacy to proactive strategic actions. Malaysia is this year's ASEAN co-chair, and the other ASEAN members include Thailand, Singapore, the Philippines, Indonesia, Brunei, Vietnam, Laos, Myanmar, and Cambodia. As for the GCC, it's the main political, economic, and security organization in the Gulf region. The member countries include Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Qatar, Kuwait, Oman, and Bahrain. On the afternoon of May 27, the first ASEAN-China GCC summit was held in Kuala Lumpur. In his opening speech, Malaysian Prime Minister Anwar emphasized that this is the first time the three parties have officially come together, marking a brand new stage in regional cooperation and serving as an important milestone. Anwar also pointed out that ASEAN, China, and the GCC together have a total population of over 2.1 billion, with a combined economic output close to $25 trillion. The prospects for cooperation are broad, and he especially praised China's constructive role in regional development. He emphasized that China has long been a reliable partner of ASEAN, and that cooperation between the two sides in areas such as connectivity, technology, and trade has made significant contributions to regional prosperity. He called on all parties to work together to promote higher-level cooperation, support multilateralism and inclusive growth, and build a peaceful, stable, and sustainable future. He said that this summit is not only a reflection of mutual trust between the two sides, but also sets a new model of win-win cooperation for countries in the global south. Reports from Nikkei Asia and the Associated Press mentioned that since Trump proposed the so-called reciprocal tariffs in April this year, ASEAN member countries have suffered significant blows. Among them, Cambodia has been hit the hardest, facing the highest tariff rate at 49%, followed by Laos at 48% and Vietnam at 46%. Although the U.S. later granted a 90-day grace period, as the trade surplus with the U.S. rapidly expanded, ASEAN is becoming the main target of Trump's tariff war. The first ASEAN GCC summit was held in Riyadh, the capital of Saudi Arabia, on October 20, 2023. At the summit, the ASEAN GCC joint statement was adopted, laying an important foundation for the enhancement and development of the partnership between the two sides. Now, ASEAN is also welcoming its largest trading partner, China, to join the discussions. The first summit between the two sides shows that ASEAN is increasingly eager to expand its trade relations beyond just the United States. According to Nikkei Asia, after Trump issued tariff threats, ASEAN, which relies heavily on exports, is looking to hedge against risks from the U.S. Besides relying on the established trade channels with China, ASEAN is also hoping to leverage the strong financial power of the Gulf countries. The Middle Eastern countries and Muslim-majority nations like Malaysia, Indonesia, and Brunei in Southeast Asia have had long-standing connections. Former Malaysian diplomat and foreign policy analyst Karim Bainer said that the first ASEAN-China GCC summit reflects a broader adjustment in the global landscape. Although the United States still leads in terms of capital flows and institutional influence, its dominance is gradually weakening. Karim Bainer further added that China's trade influence continues to expand, while the GCC possesses sovereign wealth funds and strategic energy exports, and is building lasting economic ties in the Asian region. He also mentioned that while ASEAN seeks investment from the United States, it must also remain open and flexible within the global supply chain. The real challenge lies in grasping this balance and avoiding the dilemma of having to choose sides. According to AFP, ASEAN as a whole has long avoided taking sides between China and the U.S. Traditionally, ASEAN has always played the role of a middleman between major economies like the United States and China. Chong Jia-ian, a political scientist from the National University of Singapore, said that due to the uncertainty and unpredictability of economic relations with the U.S., ASEAN member states are now seeking diversification. He pointed out that promoting exchanges with the Gulf region and China is one aspect of this diversification. Malaysia, as the current rotating chair of ASEAN, is the main driving force behind this initiative at the 46th ASEAN Summit. The Associated Press also mentioned that Anwar said last week that the GCC has already established ties with the United States. They also hope to get closer to China. At the same time, ASEAN has always maintained a neutral policy, keeping contact with both China and the United States. However, the report quoted Collins, a strategic and security analyst in foreign affairs at the University of Malaysia, as saying that ASEAN is seen as clearly leaning towards China. Although it relies on U.S. defense support, ASEAN is deepening its dependence and cooperation with China and other U.S. strategic rivals. When the Indian media outlet Economic Times covered this issue, their headline was straightforward: "Goodbye Washington, hello Beijing, ASEAN turns to China to unite against U.S. tariffs." The report pointed out that ASEAN's exports to the U.S. are currently under threat, and its future relationship with the US is full of uncertainty. ASEAN is now shifting its strategy, moving from passive diplomacy to proactive strategic action. Nikkei Asia pointed out that in recent years, trade between ASEAN and both China and the Gulf Cooperation Council has been steadily increasing. By 2024, the total trade volume has surpassed $900 billion, which is almost double ASEAN's trade with the US at $453 billion. Since Trump first took office in 2017, the cumulative increase in trade between ASEAN and both China and the Gulf Cooperation Council has reached $375 billion, significantly surpassing the $220 billion increase in trade with the US over the same period. The combined GDP of ASEAN, China, and the Gulf Cooperation Council accounts for over 20% of the world's total, making it a massive market with a population of 2.15 billion people. The report noted that recently, China has had frequent exchanges with ASEAN member countries, signing multiple economic and trade cooperation agreements with Malaysia, Vietnam, and Cambodia. When Indonesian President Prabowo attended and delivered a speech at the China-Indonesia business dinner held in Jakarta, he praised China for its unwavering commitment. He supports developing countries in their efforts to oppose oppression, imperialism, and colonialism, and hopes to continue strengthening relations with China in various strategic areas. To put it simply, Trump is determined to take the US backwards, and his stance against globalization and free trade is clear. The US government's constant flip-flopping has made the global business and investment environment far too uncertain. And as for Trump, his current approach is to implement a series of policies, whether actively or passively, that will ultimately weaken domestic consumption in the US. For global manufacturers, the US market is, of course, not something they can give up on immediately, but they will still look for opportunities in markets outside the US. As for China, it has made it clear that it welcomes openness in response to American protectionism. At this point, establishing free trade organizations with more partners is beneficial for all economies. Some people might think that the differences among the three major economies are still quite significant. It's not that easy to push for free trade. If you think back, in 1997, China and ASEAN started holding annual summits, and later proposed to set up a free trade area. Back then, the West was not optimistic at all. Who would have thought that now China and ASEAN would become each other's largest trading partners? Who would have thought that the China-ASEAN Free Trade Area has already reached version 3.0, becoming the most dynamic and promising economic region in the world? The US has tried every trick in the book to stir up trouble in the South China Sea, but still hasn't been able to shake the relationship between China and ASEAN. 10 or 20 years from now, when we look back at the cooperation between China, ASEAN, and the Gulf Cooperation Council, if we don't start working today, there definitely won't be any achievements. Once we start, there will be a chance to replicate the success of the China-ASEAN model.